Our guest today on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans to do with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city, and their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, or building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation and cash out, along with any sort of loans, as well as first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans and personal loans. Is a lady who went to 3 Olympic Games in swimming, 1988 as a teenager, 1992 and 1996. She went on to win a bronze medal in the backstroke and also won medals in relays in 1996. She's had an outstanding career in the media once her swimming career retired. She's also been a very successful sports administrator. She served on the AOC as well and was, for some 6 years, the head of the AFLW as part of the AFL. It's a great pleasure. And she's heading off to Paris as well to do some commentary so she knows everything there needs to know about the world of swimming. Nicole Livingstone, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Dan. Nice to be with you. Thank you for that very long introduction.
It was long. I wouldn't want to do it again, Nicole, because I'm sure I'd muck it up. You look back to 1988 and you were 17 years old. You would have just about been the youngest member of the team. What was that like for a bright-eyed teenager from Melbourne?
Yeah, it's interesting looking back at it because it's a very long time, so I have to try to remember it. But there were quite a few of us that made the Australian team back in 1985 that were sort of 13, 14, 15 years of age. And a lot of us went through that same period of time to get into the 1988 Olympic Games together. So I actually think Jodie Clatworthy in the 400 IM was the youngest of the baby of our team. And she's about 18 months younger than me.
It doesn't happen as much now, does it? That we saw Shane Gould win all those gold medals in Munich at the age of 15 and she was retired. I remember watching her on the ABC when I was 7 and she was 19 and she was retired at the age of 19, which is incredible. You don't see it as much now, Nicole, swimmers being 13, 14, 15, representing their country. Why is that, you think?
Well, I think the counter to that is you don't see as many retiring at 19, which is probably the answer to the question. We see someone like a Kate Campbell, and whilst she didn't make her 5th Olympic Games, she's in her 30s. A lot of our swimmers are now, and our athletes are now able to stay in the sport for a lot longer. So there's not the need to push on and do other things with your life. There's a much more holistic approach now that you are doing other things whilst also doing your sport. So there's not the need to jump out quite so quickly.
When did you decide that you wanted to be a swimmer, and when did you feel you were good enough to represent Australia at such a young age?
Well, I dreamt about going to the Olympic Games, watching them on TV in Mum and Dad's lounge room in Parkdale in Victoria, about I think about 25k south of the city. I was lucky enough to meet all the Olympic swimmers as they were doing the Olympic trials at what is now the Collingwood Football Club. Under their sprung floor is the 1956 Olympic pool, and that's where the 1980 Olympic trials were held.
Right.
So I was a little girl of 9 running around getting autographs with the autograph book, and got to meet Lisa Forrest, got to meet Lisa Curry, got to meet Tracy Wickham, Michelle Ford, Dawn Fraser. And from that moment on, I dreamt about going to the Olympic Games, and it was solidified by watching the Olympic Games in Mum and Dad's lounge room, being beamed in from the USSR in the middle of the night and seeing Australia have success. So I said to them then and there that I wanted to go to the Olympic Games. And at that same time, I just started my first race and first big race in a 50-metre pool, and it was 50 backstroke. So not only wanted to go to the Olympic Games, but wanted to be a backstroker.
Why backstroke?
Why not? You don't have to put your face in the water. You don't have to think about breathing.
No, you don't.
You can continue a conversation if you want to, but the only workplace hazard is that sometimes you hit your head on the end of the pool because you don't see it coming.
Correct.
But I loved it. I was fortunate enough to have a really good base with a coach that his foundation was all about good technique. So I was pretty good at all strokes except breaststroke. That's a whole nother sport. I was able to put together a pretty good 3/4 of a medley as well. But I represented Australia in freestyle and also butterfly as well. Little known fact, I did actually race butterfly for Australia in 1987 as well, before focusing on backstroke. But I also raced at the Olympics in freestyle as well.
Why was breaststroke more challenging than the other three?
Well, I've actually got a daughter who's a breaststroker now, so I don't know how that has actually happened. Um, but breaststroke, we often joke it is a sport of its own. They are very unique characters. They probably could be ballerinas if they wanted to in terms of the way that they turn their legs out. So yeah, I think we would always be paired with breaststrokers in our event camps. It was a backstroke breaststroke camp, which never made sense to me because we could never see them in the lane. If you were swimming on your front and you had your face in the water, you could look up and see a breaststroke kick coming at you. But backstroke, you could never see it, and you always got kicked in the back of the head by a breaststroker. So Lindley Frame is my best friend, so we often have a lot of jousting about breaststroke.
Well, she was a great swimmer, wasn't she? I mean, during that time, and Nicole Livingstone has joined me, former great Australian swimmer, three-time Olympian. She's heading off to the Olympic Games, one of the most foremost commentators in the sport and in sports broadcasting, full stop. Had a great career in sports broadcasting, which continues to this day. And she's my guest on Dashing Down to Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. In those times, Nicole, we had some outstanding female swimmers, teenage female swimmers, which has continued today. Why is that the case, do you think?
Look, I think Australia has always punched well above its weight, and I think we have this history of having amazing female swimmers and amazing swimmers. So a little like when I was growing up and was thinking about and dreaming about being just like Lisa Forrest and wanting to emulate what she did, we still continue to have that year in, year out. You know, you think of these most recent trials and having someone like Ariane Titmus, Kaylee McEwen, you know, you can rattle off these women swimmers' names, you know, Bronte Campbell, Emma McKeon, Molly O'Callaghan. There are so many of them that are there leading by example and inspiring young girls to be like them. You know, there is this, and it's not even a resurgence, there's suddenly this spotlight on women's sport, but women swimmers and women athletes in the Olympic Games have been here forever for Australia, succeeding and doing a really great job to motivate the next generation. And that's taken place with Swimming Australia. They've really done a good job at getting our athletes out to inspire the next generation as well. So yeah, I think, I don't know, if I had my time again, I'd want to be like one of them too.
You may have a different view on this, but I get the feeling that the women's team is stronger than the men's team. And what I mean by that is there's more depth as well. Is that right? More depth of talent? With the greatest respect to the men's
Well,
team.
we would be absolutely unbeatable on both the gold medal tally and total medal tally if we had the men's and women's team firing at the same time. The women's team is doing an exceptionally good job. They won't have it all their own way. The US trials have been now completed straight after our trials, and their women's swimmers are also doing exceptionally well. We have some standout male swimmers. You know, Kyle Chalmers going in to try to win an Olympic Games gold medal again and medal for a third time in the 100 freestyle at the Olympic Games. You know, we do have men that swim very, very well. It's just that the women, there are so many of them. The women's 100 free at our Olympic trials, we had 7 swimmers that qualified under the IOC qualification standards. That was the final. So it's almost as hard to make the Australian Olympic team in the 100 freestyle as it is to medal in the 100 freestyle at the Olympic Games.
Well, I mean, Emma McKeon was one of our greatest ever Olympians, and she didn't make it in the 100 metres. And I think we all thought, maybe not a certainty, but we thought she'd get one of the 2 spots, didn't we, Nicole? I certainly thought that. What was your view?
Well, it's just the way that swimming works. There's always a younger generation snapping at your heels. There's young kids that come through that, you know, really do believe that they're invincible and reputations mean nothing and they can jump in and match it with the best. We're thankful that Emma will be there in the relay. So she did finish top 6 to make it through to the relay team. She'll also be there for the 100 metres butterfly, but she'll try to defend that 100 butterfly. But in the meantime, that world record got broken over at the US trials on day 1 of competition. So again, the US, as good as we went at our trials and the excitement around that, they came out swinging as well.
Do you feel that Emma is as focused as she has been? She's had an interesting few years.
Yeah, Emma is as focused.
Yeah, do you think she's
she
focused?
is yeah, I do. I think she's as focused as she's ever been. I think what we've seen is she's now 30 years of age. You know, I retired at 25. Kate Campbell didn't make the team at 30. Emily Seebohm didn't make the team at 30 at these recent trials. So, you know, once you hit an older age of 30, it does get a little more difficult to have the same kind of performances in the pool. Your body does start to let you down a little bit, and Emma has been battling with injury. So, she is a very, very smart swimmer. She's a very smart woman that has a degree in nutrition as well. So I think she's working smart and she's working well. It's just, it is a little bit more difficult when you hit 30 to do those best times again.
And I suppose when you have a high profile relationship, of which she does, everyone wants a piece of it, don't they? Which does make it harder.
Well, not for them. I mean, Cody, we now know Cody Simpson did not make the Australian team, but I swam with Cody's mum and dad. Angie Greenwood was on the Australian team with me. So Cody comes from a very strong swimming family. Angie was a breaststroker, a wonderful breaststroker, another one of those that were from another sport. But Angie was a wonderful breaststroker. Brad, his dad, swam as well. So if anyone could immerse themselves in the world of swimming, it was Cody. And, then pairing up with Emma and her wonderful family as well, they're a match made in heaven. And I think it would have been probably more supportive to have a partner that understands swimming and their family understands swimming as well.
Fair enough. It's typical of me asking questions, not being from the inner sanctum, Nicole. With all your experience, you've batted them down magnificently. Nicole Livingstone, my guest on Dashing Game to Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. They've got over 25 lenders on their panel. You touched on it, Nicole. You retired at 25 after the 1996 Games in Atlanta. No regrets that you didn't go to Sydney?
Oh, at that stage, no swimmer had been to 4 Olympic Games, so no regrets from my perspective. I was fortunate enough to go to 3 Olympic Games, swimming on the Australian team from 13 years of age through to 25 consecutively each and every year. So no regrets. I was able to jump straight into a broadcasting career. I walked straight into having that deal signed with Nine and what was Optus Vision. I know you remember that Optus Vision back in those days that had sports vision. So swimming was one of those sports, and I got to jump straight into that and jump straight into working with the likes of Max Walker, Ray Warren, Daryl Eastlake, some really big characters in Australian TV. So to then have the next 23, 24 years of working in the media was an amazing experience. So I wouldn't change anything. And swimming and the Olympic Games was the vehicle for me to be able to get the foot in the door. And then once my foot was in the door, I grabbed it with both hands and ran for a change, ran as fast as I possibly could with that opportunity.
So you thought towards the back end of your swimming career that you'd like to get into broadcasting. That was something you were able to focus on.
Yeah, so I started working for Nine 3 years before I retired. I was doing surf lifesaving and doing that commentary and filling in at Wide World of Sports. So I got the pleasure of, doing things like sheepdog herding, 10-pin bowling, you name it, in those crazy days of Wide World of Sports that I got to do outside broadcasts and be involved with. So Warren Miller's snow adventures, those kind of things. And sitting next to someone like Max Walker was incredible. So I was actually doing it before I retired from swimming. So I've always sort of had these dual careers happening where I was swimming. I was also working in corporate public affairs in the last Olympic Games cycle. I worked in broadcast and then that kind of repeated itself as broadcast started to slow down and I got involved in sports administration. So those things were happening in parallel as well.
We'll get to the sports administration shortly, but just on your sports media career, we're jumping around a bit here, Nicole, because we're covering lots of great topics. Max Walker, the late, great Max Walker, no longer with us. I did a couple of sportsman's lunches, I suppose, with him, and he's the funniest bloke I've ever met in my life. What was he like off the air? On the air, he was a dag. Off the air, was he the same sort of guy?
He was just so kind. Whilst some people might have seen me as a threat for their position at Wild Water Sports, because there wasn't too many women broadcasting and involved front of the camera, plenty behind the camera. Max was always so kind in supporting me, in encouraging me. I actually got a little section in one of his books about hosting Wide World of Sports, and everything was live. And my heart rate would be up at about 190, 200 beats a minute as I'm reading auto cue live and having to enunciate some of the crazy places as an example, again, of Warren Miller's skiing adventures in all through what was then the USSR that have broken down, and being able to pronounce those properly, and just the fun on set. You know, Max was always part of the little gags that were going on, like me going to the bathroom and leaving my high-heeled shoes on set because I hated walking in them anyway. And the camera guys would stick my shoes to the ground. So when I come back and put my feet in, I couldn't move. You know, Max was always part of that. So it was just, you know, he not only was so lovely and caring and giving with his advice, but he was fun to work with, really fun and clean fun. He didn't have to swear, didn't have to, you know, the tongue twisters and the little stories that he used to come up with. It was a really lovely time and a lovely way to start my career, being with someone like him.
He always seemed to have a big smile on his face, didn't he? I mean, the cricketers that play with him said he was the funniest bloke they played with. I mean, Jeff Thompson and Dennis Lilly and Ian Chappell, a few larrikins there, Rod Marsh. They just thought he was as funny as a wheel every time he was in the dressing room. Something would happen, whether he meant it to happen in a funny way or whether he didn't mean it to happen. It was just the way he was.
It was the way he was working with him at Wildwater Sports as well. But having said that, you know, Darryl Eastlake, who, you know, was really a man's man, was ever so kind to me. He was the very first person I commentated with, and he gave me lots of great advice. He was the one that I did my very first screen test with for Channel 9. So, you know, and then Ray Warren, I think about being able to work with him and call all the years of swimming with him, and the excitement of being around, hearing him call and trying to contribute to that was just a joy to work with as well.
Brilliant caller, Ray Warren. Darryl Eastlake was over the top. Did you do a screen test for the weightlifting, Nicole, with Big Darryl? Because apparently they had to find him his own screen every time he's doing the weightlifting in Commonwealth or Olympic Games, because the big fella, as you know, would go over the top just slightly, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he did. Look, you know, everything was always in threes as well. When we were doing surf lifesaving, it was always pumping, 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 paddling, 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 pushing, 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 and always really loud. And he'd point to you to say something, and it'd come out of nowhere, like and then you just have to run with it. But yeah, he was very loud at Commonwealth Games in weightlifting in particular. And in fact, they had to move him to the basement for the Commonwealth Games. I think it was the KL Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
And when he got back to his local area in Wombrel in New South Wales, they threw a party for him at the local surf club pub.
Really?
And they actually had him out in the phone box out the front and set him up in there as a bit of a gag when it came to him being kicked out of being too loud for weightlifting.
I'm sure it wouldn't have worried Darryl too much. I mean, again, another one who's gone to God a little bit too young, but what a great broadcaster he was. Back to your swimming career, and Nicole Livingstone's joined us on Dashing Down to Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, who can deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. And like Nicole and I are doing today with this podcast, we can do Zoom. They can do Zoom wherever you like, and we're doing Zoom right now. Nicole, how difficult or how challenging was it as a school-age child going to school and then getting up early in the morning, and I presume also as your career was expanding in swimming, also swimming in the afternoon, fitting everything in those days?
Yeah, and being, as you said, a young person, I lived, I think I said 25K. I actually lived 30 kilometres from the city Parkdale to where I swam, which was the old Frank Bow Repair pool in Victoria. They stuck a roof on there and called it the State Swimming Centre, and it's now under Birrarung Ma. It's no longer, but my dad's old green Fairmont would be sitting out the front, or my mum's sky blue Valiant would be sitting out the front of school ready to race me into the city to try to be there by 4 o'clock, which is when we jumped into the pool. And then the mornings, my dad was a shift worker for Carlton United Breweries, and mum ran Metropolitan Golf Club kitchen for quite some time as a chef. So they would take it in turns, depending on dad's shift, to either take me in or pick me up from training and take me back to school. So it was a tough period of time, but again, I wouldn't change anything for it. My mum and dad worked particularly hard. They knew as the youngest child in the family that I had a talent for swimming, and that the best coach was in the city, and they wanted to give me the opportunity to be able to give it everything I had. So they really enabled me to get to where I was.
Magnificent commitment, no doubt. When did you think you were a chance? You did say earlier you had experience as a very young girl at 13, 14 with the Australian team. Did you feel pretty confident going into 1988 because of that experience you'd had that you would get a spot on the Australian team to go to Seoul?
Yeah, so I managed to make my very first team as a 13-year-old at that pool, the State Swimming Centre that I just described to you. We had national championships there the year after the LA Olympic Games, or it was only about 6 months later, and a lot of the great champions were still taking a break. So I jumped on that opportunity, seized it, and finished second in the 100 metres backstroke and made it onto the Australian team. So by the time 88 came around, I'd had a lot of experience. We had a lot of European racing. We had what is now called the World Cup. It used to be called the European Tour. So I did a lot of that racing. I went to the 86 Commonwealth Games, and then 87 and 88, a lot of the Europeans came out here, and we had a lot of racing against them, and likewise we would go to Europe and race. So by then I was, in 1987, I won the Pan Pacific Swimming Championships in Brisbane as a 16-year-old, and was ranked number 1 in the world. So I knew that if I could, keep improving and keep doing a good job under my good coach, Dr. Ralph Richards, that I had an opportunity to be able to do something in qualifying for the Olympics and maybe doing something a little more. Those first Olympic Games were a bit overwhelming as a 17-year-old, particularly against the might of the East Germans and what were the former communist regime countries that were competing. But I made 3 finals and finished 4th, 5th, and 7th. There were girls ahead of me that have now been shown to have been doing something a little more than their own means when it came to their results. But it set me up to be able to have a great 2nd and 3rd Olympic Games, because I knew what was expected, and I wanted to give it everything I had and not waste an opportunity at the Olympic Games.
Was that discussed at all, Nicole, after you finished the race, that maybe, and all your races, and you did so well, that the East Germans could have been involved in drugs that they shouldn't have been involved in?
It wasn't really discussed after the race. I mean, there was observations that from a physical point of view, they were much bigger than us. There were athletes that were much faster than us. Kristen Otter, I think, won 6 gold medals at those Olympic Games in 1988.
Wow.
So I raced against her in a couple of events, and she was just incredible. And when the wall came down in 1989, the secret police records were found. And they were able to sort of understand exactly what was going on. But if you think about that period of time as well, a lot of those athletes in a communist regime didn't have much say in what was going on with their own bodies. And in many cases, they were cast aside if they either didn't make the grade or in fact, they were testing positive prior to an event. They were set aside, and a clean athlete was replaced. So I do have a level of sympathy and empathy for those athletes that I competed against. Even though I came 4th, 5th, and 7th, I still got to grow up in Australia, pick the sport that I wanted to do, which was swimming, and do it under my own steam and have good health afterwards.
Absolutely. Probably we don't understand, and we may never understand what it was like living in East Germany. It would have been pretty tough. I remember going there just after the wall had gone down, only a year after, Nicole, and it was still very much like a black and white movie. You'd be in West Germany and it was modern. You go to East Germany and there wasn't any form of, I suppose, a modern aspect, bar probably having the consulates of a few countries in East Germany. It was very strange, very confronting.
Yeah, I actually went in there a couple of times on our European tour. We actually had some East Berlin competitions, and it was a very scary scenario to go in. And, we were very much briefed before we went in that secret police will be around, they'll be watching, they'll be, but we had great relationships with a lot of the Eastern Bloc country athletes. In fact, I still keep in touch with a couple of athletes that were involved in communist countries that they raced for back in the 1980s, that we managed to have little conversations either in warm-up or swim down or in the change rooms. So yeah, I do have a level of empathy for them.
So you must have felt pretty good about yourself as a 17-year-old with what you achieved, making 3 finals, and thought, gee, I'd love another crack at this in 1992. And 4 years later down the track, you obviously thought you'd be better and more experienced and stronger, no doubt.
Yeah, look, I think once you go to an Olympic Games as an athlete, particularly if that's your chosen sport, you want to keep going. So for me, I wanted to go to as many Olympic Games as my body and my mind would allow me to go to. So to go to one more Olympic Games in 1992 and give it everything that I had. And I think at that period of time, I was 21. I'd broken a world record in the short course pool leading into it. I was ranked in the top 3 of the world and just felt top of my game. So yeah, it was a great experience to be able to go into 1992 and win an Olympic medal. It's what I dreamt about as a kid, to be able to not only represent Australia but to stand on a dais and to do that in the 200 backstroke will always be a lifelong goal that I achieved. And everything happened in slow motion. I can still see all the color, all the movement. I can feel it. It's like it happened yesterday. And often if you speak to athletes, those kind of performances do feel like they were yesterday. But then I try to swim these days, Dan, and I realize that it was a very long time ago. But yeah, Barcelona was an incredible Olympic Games.
Just on that, when you're racing in the final, do you have sort of any idea? I mean, you're concentrating on your race, you're concentrating on your strokes, getting it right, making sure that you're keeping up with your times per lap, etc. Do you have any idea, Nicole, this might be, again, a very ignorant question, about what your opponents are doing in lanes next to you? And if so, how are you coping with that, as well as swimming the race?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to do it in real time. A lot of that observation gets made beforehand, and the data analytics helps you with that as well. And you can actually compare yourself to other athletes and to figure out where their weak spots are and where your advantage can be made. So for that 200 backstroke that I won a bronze medal, I knew that Christina Egazegi was going to win the event. She's from Hungary. She was the first swimmer since Dawn Fraser to win 3 consecutive gold medals in the 200 meters backstroke. That was her second gold medal. She won her first at the age of 14. Wow. So it was almost like Christina's, unless something goes wrong with Christina, she's going to win. And then we had to fight it out for the minor medals. I was beside a girl called Dagmar Hauser, who had won the 400 freestyle earlier in the meet and had beaten Janet Evans, which was a big upset. She was right beside me in lane 3. So I knew if I was close to Dagmar, then I actually had a chance. But across on the other side of Christina, and again, I'd studied all of this, was a lady by the name of Lee Lovelace, who was really fast out in the first half of the race, but then she would fade and fatigue and really slow down in that last lap. So the strategy was to be at Dagmar's shoulders, if I could be, by the last lap, and really just hammer home in the last 50, because my strength was to be able to swim very fast in the second half of the race. So I went out very well. You can look at the sort of scoreboard and see in real time how you're going during a backstroke race, particularly at those games, because there were scoreboards at the end. But I could see that I was in 4th for the 3 laps of 4, and that last lap just really hammered home, and was able to touch the wall and look up and see the number 3 after my name and my best time, which lasted as an Australian record for 16 years. So yeah, it was a pretty magical race that happened in slow motion, and the last event of the Barcelona Olympic Games individually. And Kieran had raced that day, and I was the last event. So to see all my teammates in the stands and cheering and celebrating was pretty special.
So obviously you felt, looking back, Nicole, that you couldn't have raced any better. It was just about the perfect race.
Look, it was the perfect race because I raced the race and I did my best time. If I look at it now, Kaylee McEwen's going 2:03. And yes, it's 32 years ago. I went 2:10 back in 1992. She goes 2:03 now. And in fact, in the final of this Olympic Games trials, I think I would have made the final for the Australian Olympic Games trials and maybe finished the top 4 or so with my best time. So yeah, I mean, I would have always liked to have gone faster, but that was the best race that I had on the day, and it got me on the podium, as opposed to my 100, which was also my best time ever, and I finished 4th, so I missed the podium. So that's that one was pretty bittersweet and drove me to really want to hammer down that last lap and get on the podium.
You've got to be obviously performing at your best if you can. Sometimes things get in the way, as we've seen many times at the Olympic Games. It's the beauty of the Olympic Games. But you must be very proud of yourself, Nicole, that you produced your best times in the 100, 200 metres when it counted in 1992 in individual events at the Olympics.
Yeah, those games were incredible, and I loved being part of the Australian swimming team each and every year. That one in particular was pretty special. Actually, I was looking through some vision the other day, and I posted it recently for Olympic Day. I didn't realize I actually raced the 4x100 freestyle relay as well. I'm not sure how that happened. Somebody must have been sick and I got thrown into it, but I was looking at vision of me, looking at my coach, and I had a massive smile on my face. And I think that smile on my face was, well, this is going to be interesting. What the hell am I doing, rolling onto my stomach doing freestyle in this 4x1? But yeah, it was a great game. So a lot of fun, and a team that still keeps in touch with each other. We really like each other.
Kieran, I mean, just his performance was, we'll get to his other outstanding performance in Atlanta shortly, but that performance when he was the red hot favourite and he performed like the red hot favourite, I mean, that just indicated what a champion he was too.
Yeah, he won it by 25 metres. Glenn Housman came second from Australia. Jorg Hoffman was somewhere there, but, you know, Kieran was looking to try and make amends from the year before where Jorg beat him in Perth at the World Championships. But yeah, that I watched it from the marshalling room. So I watched it on a TV screen. I could feel the stands bouncing around. I could see how well Kieran was going, and I knew he was in red hot form. So yeah, it was one of the most amazing swims. But again, you know, his 400 was amazing. He had a great Olympic Games that Olympics.
Just fast forwarding 4 years, talking of Kieran, did you know something was off with him going into the 1500 metres before the final? I heard recently that Greg Norman, well, I think we've all known about the Greg Norman Kieran story. Kieran was hunchback after he'd known he just snuck into the final in lane 8, and Greg Norman was having a chat to him. Whatever the Shark said to him obviously worked, because he's gone out and produced one of the great races of all time. But did you know, Nicole, that something was off going into his race in 1996?
I think a lot of us were surprised at how slow he swam in the heats, that he didn't look very good in the heats. And whilst Greg will take the credit for maybe saying some wise words, a guy by the name of Roger Fitzgerald, who was one of our physiotherapists who worked very closely with Kieran, and back then, still now, the heats of the 1500 is on the morning of day one, not day one because it's the second to last day.
Yeah.
And then you have 36 hours. So it's not until the finals of the following day that you race those finals. So Kieran had qualified in the outside lane, just snuck in. Dan Kowalski was one of the fastest qualifiers. And Roger, Mr. Carew, his coach, knew that something was amiss with his technique. So knew that he needed to do some technical work, but Roger had figured out that potentially, you know, his spine, his ribs, a few things were out. So Roger spent a day and a half working on him, trying to get him back into great physical shape. But I will say that it's about racing the race at the Olympic Games, and that's what we'll see in Paris this year. Because Kieran's time to win that Atlanta Olympic Games was, I think, about 14 seconds slower than the previous Olympics. So it was just under 15 minutes. So it wasn't a fast 1500, but he raced the race and touched the wall first.
Do we give Dan Kowalski enough credit? I mean, he sort of goes into the background. He was probably the favourite, certainly the Australian favourite after what had happened to Kieran, but he swam a pretty good race as well. And we have to remember he was a darn good swimmer, but he was just in the shadow of Kieran Perkins, one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, and look, our 1500 stocks have always been amazing in the men. So to have the incredible swimmers that we do have racing in that event and the history that we have, Dan did something that no man had ever done, and that was to win an Olympic medal in every freestyle event that was on offer, the 200, 400 and 1500. So he had an incredible Olympic Games. Would he have liked to have won a gold medal? Of course, everybody dreams about that, but he did what he could do on that day, and it wasn't good enough to win gold. And I think he now has worked through that, thankfully, all these years later, and is in a wonderful position in his life. He actually looks after, at the Australian Olympic Committee, he looks after Olympian services. So he's got a wonderful job, and he can pass on his wisdom and look after us as old Olympians, but also the current crop too.
He's a great fellow too, Dan Kowalski. Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures podcast is with you again for Aussie Home Loans, and my guest is three-time Olympian, and she won a medal in 1992 and two in 1996 in the relays, and also a preeminent sports broadcaster heading over to Paris to broadcast the swimming for the IOC, and also a leading sports administrator as well, and Nicole Livingstone. So, Nicole, in 1996, you were involved in two relays. You mentioned before you also swam freestyle. How much training in the freestyle did you do compared to the backstroke?
Well, I mean, the majority of our base work is done freestyle, and then you do your main sets in your form stroke. So the majority of my base work was done freestyles. I was three-time national champion in 200 freestyle. And actually won those Olympic trials in 1992, heading into the Barcelona Olympic Games, made the B final, the 200 freestyle, when I won my Olympic medal in backstroke. So I was definitely racing freestyle, but for the 1996 Olympic Games, I wasn't. I was solely focused on racing backstroke, and it was the first time the 4x200 freestyle relay had been introduced to Olympic competition, and the heat had been swum, and Don Talbot made a decision that he would put me in the 4x200 freestyle relay final team for the first time, which was a brave decision, because for the first time in 3 Olympic Games, I think I made like 11 or 12 finals in Olympic competition, but I'd missed the 200 backstroke final for the first time ever. And I think I did a number on myself emotionally, because I had announced that I was retiring from swimming. So I suddenly became overwhelmed with everything. Was the last time I was doing something. So the 200 backstroke, it was the last time I was marshalling. It was the last time I was racing, last time I was diving in, doing my backstroke start. So I just remember that 200 backstroke, the last individual race, doing my underwater and coming up to take my first strokes and thinking, oh, I don't feel very good. And as soon as you start to think those kind of thoughts, you're done for. It's like you're swimming in wet cement. So it wasn't a great 200 back. So it was almost, Don was one of my nemesises. We had ding dong battles on the team. I was quite outspoken with him, but he was. I mean, tyrant is probably too strong a word, but it was Don's way or the highway. And we spent a lot of time as athletes trying to rebel a little bit against that and trying to push the boundaries with him. So I feel like that 200 freestyle relay was Don's parting farewell of, here, you can have a final spot in the 4x2. Don't come back. Thanks very much for your service. So I'll always be grateful that he did give me a spot in that 4x2 to race with Susie O'Neill, Emma Johnson and Julia Greville, and win a bronze medal. Was absolutely sensational. So it was a great experience.
How were you feeling when you found out you had to do the freestyle? Was there a bit of training going pretty quickly, Nicole? Because as you said, you hadn't done a lot of prep in the freestyle. Not that you would have lost the ability to swim it and swim it quickly, but no. Were the nerves there more than ever?
It was probably more the changeovers as well. Different teams have different relay tactics, but back then the weakest link was always buried as the third swimmer, and I was third. Right. But you have to, my responsibility at those Olympic Games was to touch on a full stroke in backstroke for the breaststroke changeover in the medley relay. That's the only thing I was thinking about with all of our relay changeovers. So to then suddenly have to stand on the blocks and do a freestyle relay changeover with no practicing, not even knowing, what the timing of the swimmer coming in was, what their technique was, in backstroke to breaststroke changeovers, which I did a lot with Sam Riley. It's 4 strokes under the flag. So I would spend a lot of time, and this is where being a chatterbox in backstroke came in. I would spend time actually counting my strokes aloud for Sam to get her timing and know where my lunge was going to be. So to then have to do a freestyle changeover and not go early and not false start and disqualify the team, but not be too slow that you missed out on winning a medal. So, but those, Emma and Julia were only 16. They were the babies of our team. So for myself and Susie to be able to shepherd them through was also really lovely. And again, I still have a lifelong connection with all of those girls.
How great a swimmer was Susie O'Neill?
Yeah, she was pretty good. She was pretty good. Again, you asked me before, was that the fastest you could have swum? Would you have liked to have swum faster? I'm sure Susie, there are events that she would have liked to have swum faster and done better or done differently. But she did what she could. She tried as hard as she could and came up with a great amount of Olympic medals. I think she's 7 or maybe she's 9 Olympic medals. So yeah, we used to call her the silent assassin.
Yeah.
She wouldn't spend a lot of time talking, but she'd get that look in her eyes and away she went. And now I see her and she's working in radio and the like, and suddenly found her sense of humor and her voice, and is the life of the party. But she was very quiet on the Australian swimming team and very determined. So, a very good swimmer.
Did you ever think she'd have a career in the media? There's a few people like that in sport, no chance, and they go into it, and they're absolutely outstanding at it. And I've heard a little bit of a Brecky show. She's very good, very good.
She's outstanding. She's and I did see that wicked sense of humor on a team. You can't spend the amount of time. I was on the team with her, I think for about 8 years. You can't spend that amount of time with somebody without seeing their sense of humor or their strong spots or their weak spots. So I know Susie really well. We're really great mates, and she's doing a great job on radio and really discovering the youth that she never had as an athlete. So yeah, she's a good stick. I really like her.
Now, the medley relay was a ripper because Australia won a silver medal. This is a darn good team. You look at this team and this would stand up against any Australian women's swimming team, especially in the medley relay. Nicole Livingstone in backstroke, Samantha Riley in breaststroke, Susie O'Neill in butterfly, and Sarah Ryan in freestyle. It's a darn good team, Nicole, isn't it? No wonder you won silver.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a darn good team. We wish we had won gold. We actually beat the US in the Pan Pacs the year before in 1995. So they just lifted. They found something in that Atlanta crowd. There was 15,000 home crowd advantage. We gave it everything we had and came up with the silver. But Sarah Ryan, I spent a lot of time racing with Sarah. To know that she was our anchor, bringing it home, you bet your house, you bet everything on Sarah, being able to hold her position and defend her position as well. Sam was an incredible career in breaststroke, world champion, and then Susie in the butterfly. We were a great team and again great mates as well. And that marshalling area, when you go in as a team as opposed to individuals, is a lot of fun. You see all the different personalities. Susie was very quiet, whereas I was very loud and liked to try and psych people out. And I think she actually was quite amused by the fact that I used to try and do that in relays as well.
And Sam, to me, I've interviewed her as well, seemed pretty quiet as well. She's a bit like a silent assassin, or was a silent assassin on the pool in the breaststroke, Nicole, wasn't she, in a lot of ways?
Yeah, look, Sam and Susie used to room together, so they were very quiet. But they liked a good time as well. We did a lot of rookie nights, very innocent initiation nights where we would put on skits and plays and things like that. And Sam always came to the party with that and was a lot of fun. So again, when we see each other, we pick up like it was yesterday, but there's certainly some decades that have gone under the bridge since then.
Was that your last race, or was your last race the freestyle relay?
Freestyle relay was the last race, yeah. And then that was the night at the Atlanta Olympic Games, the last night of the swimming, where we all went out. We went out to the AT&T Centre, and that's where, unfortunately, a bomb exploded in Centennial Park. So very quickly, and I was one of 14 leaders of that team in 1996, and we were allowed to go out. We just needed to be careful, and I think the rule was, don't get in trouble, don't end up in a headline in a newspaper. So we had to very quickly find where all our athletes were and shepherd people home. So I was out with Emma and Julia, who were our youngest on the team, making sure that they got home okay. So we were all accounted for eventually. And it was a bit of a sad note for the 96 Olympic Games. But I think it gave us an opportunity to continue to bond and be together as a team.
When you heard about the bomb, what was your first thought? Is everyone safe? That's probably a silly question, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really about, was everyone safe? Because particularly that AT&T Centre, Janet Evans was on stage that night at the AT&T Centre. So it was really about trying to find where everyone was. And Susie was with her now husband, Cliff Fairley, and staying at his place for the night. So we didn't know where Susie was. Same to Sam was with her partner. So for a little while, we didn't know where Sam was either, but, understood that they were with significant others. So we're in a good place. But it was a bit testy for a little while. But again, from my point of view, being the one of the team leaders, making sure that Julia and Emma were okay and we got back to the village okay.
Very early days of mobile phones. I'm not sure that, certainly everyone wouldn't have had one, but there might have been a few distributed amongst the team. Is that not right, Nicole?
Yeah, I reckon we did. We were still getting herograms back in those days, which were the old faxes that were coming through, and we were sticking them on our walls. So, there would have been very early days of mobile phones. I can't remember having one, but we managed, once word got around, to get back and all be accounted for.
Was there any talk from coaches trying to talk you out of retiring, or you'd already made your mind up that there was no chance you'd be right for Sydney, even though it was going to be a home Olympics and you would have been one of the very few swimmers to get to 4 Olympic Games at that stage?
Yeah, it would have been the only one at that stage from Australia. Liesl Jones ended up getting that accolade a little later, but no, I had signed a contract with Channel 9 and was moving on to start working in broadcast and working on Wild Water Sports. So I was ready for my next stage and ready to dive into it, pardon the pun.
What was being part of the Sydney Games like, though, in a different role? I mean, that they were outstanding Olympic Games, weren't they? I'm not just saying that being an Australian, but I was lucky enough to be there as a broadcaster. My first one, green as grass, but loved every minute of it. It was just run so well, wasn't it?
It was a great Olympic Games. I was working corporately during those Olympic Games and actually managing some athletes as well. So it was a great experience to be able to be in there and watching. I didn't envy some of the pressure moments. I remember watching Susie in the 200 butterfly where Misty Hyman beat her in the 200 butterfly final, just seeing Susie walk out and knowing her so well and just seeing how nervous she was and realizing how nervous she was. I sat in the stands and watched that. So I didn't envy her racing in that event, seeing how nervous she was, but then the joy of the 200 freestyle the day before was just incredible. I rode every bump with them, but it was nice sitting in the stands.
Were you anywhere near the main stadium when Cathy Freeman won her race? I often asked athletes like yourself who appear on Dashing Down to Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans, Nicole, about what they were doing, where they were regarding Cathy Freeman, because even though Susie was probably favourite in her race, Cathy was even a warmer favourite in her race and basically had the whole nation on her shoulders.
Yes, she did. I didn't get to go to Cathy's 400 metres. I wish I had have. I watched it on TV with it, millions of others around the world, and certainly it stopped the whole nation. To see Cathy, even the opening ceremony, holding that torch for so long, waiting for the cauldron to light. Raylene summed it up beautifully, where Bruce called it so wonderfully, and then Raylene just said, "What a relief!"
Oh, what a line!
Because it was.
Yeah, I mean, you're being a broadcaster yourself. Not a better line, I don't reckon. I've said this a few times on this podcast, Nicole, that is one of the great lines from Raylene Boyle.
Yes, she did a remarkable job in calling that event, and has contributed greatly, and is in the new Olympic campaign in promoting the 2024 Paris Olympic Games as well. So it's great to see Raylene in that campaign, one of 8 Olympians that the Olympic Committee has chosen to promote the Olympic oath for Australia in promoting the Paris Olympic Games. We also share a birthday, so Raylene and I have a bit of a special bond.
Oh, very good. There's a few between you, Nicole, isn't there? I won't say any more.
A little bit between it.
Yeah,
rub that in every now and then.
A woman doesn't show her age, does she? Nicole Livingstone is my guest on Dashing Down.
I talk about it anyway.
Let's not. Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures is our podcast for Aussie Home Loans. Nicole Livingstone is my guest as I perspire, as I got myself into trouble, as I often do. Nicole, you were on the AOC for a few years. How did you enjoy that? You were part of the ticket to replace John Coates, hoping that Danny Roach would get up. Why did you decide to jump on Danny Roach's ticket?
Well, I was fortunate enough to go through 2 election cycles with the Australian Olympic Committee, so had 2 periods of time with them. I felt at that time that it would be good to have some refreshing views of the Olympic Committee in Australia. And Danny was somebody that was coming forward and offering those. So yeah, I mean, John's been remarkable in his contribution to the Australian Olympic movement and continues to be recognised for that. And he's on the 2032 Olympic Games organising committee and will be again front and centre in 2024. So the Australian Olympic movement is in really solid hands now with Ian Chesterman as president, and the evolution of that as well. But part of what John did was around the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, and it's obviously in Olympic folklore now in terms of the share of the 2000 Olympic Games rights and fees, and to be able to then put that into a foundation to help the Olympic movement in Australia survive. But at that time, I thought that some renewed views would be good. And yeah, so I mean, Danny didn't get on, Andrew Plimpton didn't get on as vice president either. But I managed in that ticket to be able to get back onto the Australian Olympic Committee, but subsequently stood down once I started with the AFL.
After you decided to go with Danny Roche against John Coates, was your relationship still okay? Because he was fighting, some would say probably he's back against the wall. We know what a great fighter John Coates is. When there's something it looks like he's not going to get, and he wants it, he's determined to get it. And we saw it way back in 1980 at Moscow. So was your relationship still okay, Nicole, and the rest of the time you spent on the AOC with John Coates still as the president?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of time that I spent on the AOC after that, because I think within probably about 2 months, I was starting to work at the AFL, and part of my job with the AFL was obviously to get AFLW up and happening and started. And Gil, who was the CEO at the time, really wanted to be sure that in representing the AFL, when I walked in the door, that people weren't confused about who I was representing. So I was chair of the VIS at the time. I was on Vic Health as deputy chair. So all of those board positions, except for Swimming Australia, because I think Gil thought that swimmers wouldn't make good footballers, were relinquished, and just so I could focus full time on AFLW.
Would have you taken the AFLW job if Danny had have become president?
Well, the AOC job was a voluntary job. It wasn't paid. So clearly my profession was moving into sports administration. So, the AFLW role came up and I applied for that and was successful in it. So that became my profession. So I think if Danny had been president, Gil McLachlan would have asked for the same thing, that there was no confusion as to who I was representing when I walked in a room. And so I'm sure he would have asked me to do the same thing, which was to streamline those board commitments that I had away from the AFL.
What do you think is John Coates' biggest strength, Nicole?
I think his advocacy for the Australian Olympic movement, obviously the Olympic movement in totality as well, now that he's had such a prolonged career in the IOC. But he fought and has always fought very hard for Australia to have its rightful place in Olympic history and also success. So Chesty's doing a great job. And now with Anna Mears as our chef de mission, she is a wonderful athlete, is a wonderful inspiration for the nation. So I think the way that he has brought through Ian and he's brought through Anna, I think we're in really great hands.
Couldn't be a better person to be chosen to be chef de mission, Anna Mears, considering what she achieved and the adversity she suffered when she suffered that terrible injury and came back and almost won a gold medal. I mean, she is the sort of person that'll lead this team magnificently, won't she, considering what she's achieved as an athlete, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think about Anna leading the Australian Olympic team, the way that she inspired them in 2016 as team captain, before going out and carrying the flag and giving her address to the Australian Olympic team. I mean, she's a wonderful person and a wonderful athlete. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time working on cycling when I was working for Sports Vision and Channel 9. So spent time in those early years with Kerry, her sister, and also Anna being involved in cycling. So yeah, wonderful hands that the Australian Olympic team are in.
What do you think makes a good broadcaster, Nicole? I mean, you've been a broadcaster for a long, long time now.
I think a good broadcaster enables the athlete's performance to come to light and to really shine through. I think a good broadcaster doesn't make it about them, that they're really focused on bringing to life the performance of the athlete that you're seeing, the drama, the theatre of the mind. If you close your eyes and you listen and you're not watching, you're able to live through every stroke or every stride. And to be able to feel the excitement and to have the spine tingled. So I think that's a commentator's job. My job was obviously and is the expert commentary.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I try to do is to impart what I'm seeing in the water in layman's terms, so people actually can then look for what I'm talking about, whether it's technique, whether it's race tactics, whatever it might be, but also to know the stories behind those performances that we see.
Are you as excited about the Olympics now as you were as an athlete and even in your early days as a broadcaster? Do you think the future's looking pretty bright for it?
I love the Olympic Games. I have always loved the Olympic Games since I was little, and what they offer, and that is to inspire not only our nation, but to inspire the world. We come together for those 16 days, a little longer these days, but 16 days of glory, and we're able to unite the world. And often people are saying to me, are the Olympics still relevant? Yes, they are. Because for those 2 weeks, everybody focuses on the Olympic Games, the spirit of the nations, the spirit of the world coming together and really being united. And even for those nations that for some reason there's a difficulty in them being either represented or representing, then we compete under the Olympic flag, which is really lovely to see. That's an addition, a recent addition to the Olympic Games. So I think it unites the world, and I think human endeavour and just the spirit of the Olympic Games continues to roll on. I'm really excited about Paris, and I think Tokyo 2021, from a swimming point of view, given the limited preparation that our athletes had, it was a racing meet. The times weren't important, but the world is swimming fast. And I'm really excited to be able to be there and to commentate on that.
And I know it's still 8 years away. How are you feeling about Brisbane? There still needs to be some work that needs to be done, and people need to probably get on the same page, but it will be exciting once it gets here, won't it?
Yeah, it will be exciting. The 2028 Olympic Games have just announced all of their infrastructure final plans. So we've got to see, the pool, we've got to see the baseball field, we've got to see all of those facilities. So there is an LA Games before ours. So
Yes.
we just need to make sure that we're continuing to move in the right direction. There's always drama surrounding a build. We saw that in 2000. I have no doubt that we will get it done as Australians, and it will be done very well.
And how do you feel about LA looking for the swimming to be the second week and athletics the first week? It's always been swimming first week and athletics second week.
Look, I think most swimmers will say any pool, anytime, it doesn't matter. So if that is determined as the right way to do the Olympic Games for LA, then, the swimmers will just dive in and do what they need to do. So it doesn't make any difference. It will obviously just be the timing of the preparation and whether or not there are enough beds in the village. There's always that transition of people having to go out and come in. No problem at all. Doesn't matter.
Nicole,
we can bring home the gold medal tally.
Well, that's exactly right. That's all that matters in the end, isn't it? I'm sure the swimmers will be as prepared as they usually are. It was a very interesting decision made by the LA organising committee a couple of days ago, but we've just been used to having the athletics second and the swimming first. We'll get used to it if swimming becomes second and athletics becomes first, provided the Olympics are still going, Nicole. And just before I let you go, on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans, they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. You did touch on your time with AFLW. How proud are you of your legacy in that space and what you achieved there? And do you think that maybe looking back, putting 18 teams in, we went a little bit too early for the AFLW, or do you think it'll grow the way it needs to grow with the 18 teams in the next few years?
I think having 18 teams as quick as we did was the right decision. I think when it came to growing AFLW, we have 18 AFL clubs. There was something in that for the equality of the sport to be able to offer women to wear every club's Guernsey as well, and to have the opportunity to be elite athletes. So to have 540 AFLW players now standing alongside the 18 men's teams was a really important move for the AFL. And the foundation clubs that we started with, 8 of them, were year on year having an advantage. So the longer we waited, when I was in that role, the longer we waited to bring in the 18 clubs, the more of an advantage that those foundation clubs had, and potentially more of a gap in terms of the ladder. So I think the right decision was made. And in fact, I was part of that during the 2021 Olympic Games. And I remember sitting in one of the broadcast booths, having all of the teams come in one after another to bid for the licenses, the remaining licenses, and then talking to the AFL Commission and them making the decision that we'll just bring the last group of teams in together. So it's a timely reminder as I line up for an Olympic Games that happened just 3 years ago. So it moves fast, but I'm really proud of where it is.
And you think that talent is developing quick enough to keep up with the demand for good players to come in the system?
Yeah, I think that the Australian Championships are just about to take place up on the Gold Coast, and I think pre-season training's already started.
Yes.
Year on year, the players are getting better. So I think AFLW will be a cracking season yet again, with one more round in season 2024.
Well, Nicole, you've had an outstanding career as a swimmer, as an administrator so far. That's not finished. Your broadcasting career is not finished. I wish you all the best in Paris. You'll have a great time, no doubt. It should be wonderful watching not only the Australian swimmers, but all the other swimmers and all the other athletes. I really appreciate you joining me for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. And their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Safe travelling, and thanks for joining us, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Dan. Appreciate it.